I thought I would start today just with this nice picture of a mill in Ballsbridge. Uh, it's a lovely picture from 1812, and that shows a very simple mill with a double mill wheel. Uh, and I thought I'd start with this picture here on the top right from Claire Sweeney's brilliant book, The Rivers of Dublin. Now, as archaeologists, we're always talking about rivers. Every second program you see on RTE is about rivers as highways, rivers as a way of getting through the country and the motorways, etc., etc. But today, I suppose I want to focus on rivers as sources of energy and how in the past people took that kinetic energy and transferred it into mills. Now, we have very significant rivers around Dublin City. Everyone obviously is aware of the Liffey, but we also, if you look down at the bottom left, have the Dodder, the Poddle, and the Camac. Now, these rivers especially were very much used and canalized for mills during from the medieval period onwards. And into the 19th century, the Ordnance Survey, by that time we have 136 mills in County Dublin. So that's a fair number. A lot of those would be involved in cloth production, like tuck mills, beetling mills, spinning mills, Scotch mills, all these things, even gunpowder mills, spade mills. But we still have 25 corn mills and 25 flour mills. So mills would have been ubiquitous within the city, places that were important in terms of trade, places that were important in terms of industrial and technological knowledge and prowess. Now, all of you probably know how water bills work, but for those of you who don't, just a quick. And today, I should be specific, we're looking at corn, flour, and grist water mills. Grist is a term for a corn mill. That use water, and we're not looking at windmills or horse-drawn mills, anything like that. And we're looking at water mills that process cereals. So in essence, by definition, they have to use a millstone. So a water mill works, it's quite simple, really. The technology outside the mill, you have a source of water, be that a river or even the canals in Dublin were used as a source of water. The source of water is then diverted using a weir into a mill race, where the water is diverted into a mill pond, and from the mill pond into a tail race or a head race, and then a sluice gate is opened and the water is poured over a mill wheel to move the mill wheel, and that power is transformed into kinetic energy and pushed into the mill itself. Now you have three kinds of mill wheel. You have the undershot, which was mostly used in the west side of Ireland and was used up until the post-medieval period, almost exclusively. Then you have the overshot wheel, which is the best kind, gives the most energy, and then the breast shot wheel. And then the water exits from underneath the water wheel in a tail race. And then we have the first one I just showed you was a vertical water wheel, and this is the horizontal water wheel, which a lot of you would be familiar with your excavations. This type is simpler by definition. It can only run one set of millstones. You have a horizontal wheel with paddles on it, and then a penstock or a flume, which shoots water down from the river or mill race or stream to rotate the water wheel. Now here's a lovely reconstruction on the bottom right by Colin Rinn from the 9th century in High Island. And the bottom left, we have a grave from Kilbegley and Roscommon excavated by Neil Jackman and Cathy Moore for VJK in 2007. Now it's interesting because this type of mill was used a lot on the west side of Ireland up until 18th, 19th century, but we don't have it as much, or in the archaeological record, we do not really see it around Dublin at all. So this will be my only mention of the horizontal water wheel. And as an aside, my first job, I suppose if you can call it in archaeology, was in the Irish National Heritage Park. when I was 15, and my job was to I don't know if you're all familiar with the reconstruction of the horizontal watermill in Heritage Park. But my job was to open the sluice gate and to pour grain into the millstones when I was 15. So I suppose that was my start, and I had no choice since then. Now, this is a nice picture of a mill in Animo, County Wicklow, and you can see the infrastructure very clearly here on the bottom left. So this is a 19th century picture. You have your mill pond on the left, and then the water has been diverted from the river, which is on the right, and you can see then an undershot mill wheel that's transferring that power into the mill building on your left. And on the top, we have Ordnance Survey 1847, 5 foot to 1 mile reproduction there. And what's great about mills is they are places of importance in industry, in society. So they are included in important cartographic sources. And also what's included is that you have the different infrastructural parts of mills, not just the mill itself, the shape of the mill, but also things like the mill pond and the mill race. In this case, you can see the mill race, the head race is going actually underneath the mill, which is flour mill in Warmount Mills. Fortunately, I was fortunate enough to help Claire Walsh excavate this mill a few years ago, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a while. So inside the mill is possibly the most important thing, is the gearing and the power transmission in the gear pit. Now, this in itself is a science. These are things that engineers dreamed up back in the 19th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. And I don't want to go too much into this at the moment, just to say we have a cast iron gearing system that enabled the powering of 2 or more millstones within a mill from around the 18th century onwards, but commonly used in the 19th century. And that enabled then the milling industry to go from a very localized affair that you would have had obviously in the medieval period to one that was an international affair, where we have Irish flour being exported on a huge basis from around the 18th century onwards. So you have that power going from the gearing system up a shaft and into the millstone. And here on the left, you can see a bottom millstone, which is the bed millstone. Shaft goes up through that and then attaches via a rin socket into the top stone or the runner stone. The bed stone stays stationary, and the top stone rotates then to grind the flour. Now, millstones is something I could talk about all day. I'm one of those nerds, but I'll just talk about them for a minute, because a lot of millstone scholars, and yes, that is a thing before I hear you sniggering, feel that the millstone is the most important aspect to a mill. Without a good millstone, the mill will not work properly. So it's the equivalent of having a Mercedes car with a Skoda engine if you don't have a good millstone within the mill. Apologies to Skoda and anybody who drives a Skoda here today. But here, as I said, you can see the top millstone on the top left, and it's surrounded by what's known as a tun, T-U-N, and that catches the flour or the grinded grain out from the sides in between, out from the space in between the two millstones. Now, millstones in themselves have an important typology. Just to start, 7th century, well, there's no doubt that mills were in Ireland from at least the early medieval period onwards. Colin Rinn has done so much work on this, Colin Rinn down in Cork. We have more evidence of early medieval mills in Ireland, even in Cork, than the rest of Europe does put together. Now, this may be a result of Colin's hard work, but it's also as a result of the level and of milling that went on in Ireland at the time. And one of the most important mills, early medieval mills, was Nendrum Mill, a tidal mill up in County Down. And just to look at the millstones from here, if you're on a site and you're not sure, you find a bit of a millstone, because obviously millstones are one of the most important, as I said, but one of the most frequently found things within an archaeological excavation context that leads you to think, oh, we might be onto something here in terms of mill building or mill infrastructure. But medieval and medieval millstones are smaller than later millstones. This reflects the lack of the ability of the mill to push a larger millstone, especially if it has a horizontal water wheel. And you can see an early medieval one is smaller in size, commonly less than 1 meter in diameter, and maybe 80 centimeters. And it also has these concentric rings around the central perforation, known as the eye. And they were, I suppose, decorative in nature, but also used to catch falling grain, so nothing was wasted. Just one more thing about millstones, just to say that, as I say, these are the most commonly found thing, and these are very helpful to data cite. Millstones in Ireland are generally made from a sandstone conglomerate or granite. Examples here on the two on the left, you can see a pair of millstones there from Wexford. And the top one, you can see the rin socket in the upper stone, and all the other millstone fragments that I'm showing here have been found in Dublin in recent years. In the top left, just very recently on a site in Newmarket, and the bottom left, I think, was on a site just off Little Green Street. So they're very important things in terms of typology. And one of the most important things that we have of post-medieval millstones is their size, generally around 1.2 meters, because a smaller millstone will run faster and then therefore be more productive, okay? Around 1700 or so, they got as big as 2 meters in diameter. So you've got an early medieval millstone, which is around 1 meter. Around 1700, they go up to nearly 2 meters. And then around 1900, you go down to around 1.2 meters in diameter, reflecting the technology, the adoption of gearing to make a water wheel go faster and to make the millstone go faster as well. And one of the most important things is the introduction of lands and furrows. You can see that diagram there. If you find a bit of a millstone, as you can see those ones there, and they have these lands and furrows in them, that then is a later millstone, which is the most commonly found part. Sometimes they are found reused in mills as part of the rubble used to make walls. Sometimes they are found in mill races, filled in mill races, but they're very handy dating method. So these lands and furrows were used almost like a scissors-like action. You have the bottom millstone and the top one rotating over it, and the top and the bottom millstone would have these lands and furrows, and that would aid the grinding of the grain. One last thing is that a lot of millstones, pieces of millstones that are found, people don't realize they're pieces of millstones, because from around 1900 onwards, we have the importation of millstones from France made of a limestone quartzite that were by far better than the locally produced and also English millstones that we had here. And this is another talk I'll give on another day, but millstones were imported in pieces here. These were called composite millstones. Old millstones are called monolithic millstones, but these were composite millstones made of different parts and then put together with plaster of Paris and then with an iron hoop. And these were by far the best type of millstone, as they were porous. And also they mirrored the taste for white bread that came into Ireland and England in the 19th century. As you can see, the stone is a lot brighter, and the little specks of stone that might get into the white flour was not as noticeable. So that's just a little bit about mill infrastructure. Simple, but these are the things that you're looking for if you're excavating a mill site, or you come across something like this and go, oh, wait a minute, we may have a mill here. And I'll talk a bit more about that now. Look at excavations. First of all, I'd like to thank the directors of the site for giving me access to their reports very kindly, and also to say that all these excavations were carried out as a result of a planning permission condition. So early medieval mills. We don't have much in Dublin in terms of early medieval mills, and you may remember those horizontal mills that I just showed you. We don't have any of those, but the one we do have is a doozy, okay? And this was excavated by Claire Walsh in around 2002. I was fortunate enough to be on the site. showing my age now, but I think it was my first time working with Claire. And I do remember it was 2002 because we got off early one day to watch Ireland play in the World Cup. So thank you for that, Claire. And this is a really, really important site in Chapel Lizard. I'm sure everybody knows about Chapel Lizard on the north side of the Liffey, out a bit west from the city. And this was an early medieval mill race and mill. And you can see it's 50 meters in length, 5 meters wide, cut into subsoil, 2 meters. The sides of the mill race are stone faced. And an extremely important site, as I said. And you can see in the bottom right there, that is the mill building with cut masonry. So an important building that would have kept a community going. Now, there's not very much known about early medieval Chapel Lizard. In medieval Chapel Lizard, there's loads of historical references. So we don't exactly know who built this mill or how big of a community was involved. But when you see, that's only a section of the mill race. When you see the amount of work put in for a structure like this, it's quite something. And on the bottom left is a picture from the Irish Times. So we got some exposure, and that is the legend. That is Conor McHale doing his planning there. So the mill building itself, you can see there's a slight recess in the lower masonry to hold the axle for the mill wheel. Here is a reconstruction by Colin Wynne of this very mill building. So you have, as I said, a stone-lined head race here on the left-hand side leading into a sluice gate, and then a timber-lined wheel area, and then that leads onto a tail race. And then you have your mill building, which is made completely of masonry. So not much wood in the walls, although internally there is wood. And you can see then that is an undershot water wheel leading to wooden gearing up to your millstone. So that's the only example, as I said, of early medieval mill that we have within the city or just outside the city. Medieval mills, everyone I'm here today will be familiar with some kind of reference to medieval mills, I would hope. My favorite one, of course, is a reference to a purchase of a millstone for the King's Mills in Dublin, a millstone from Wales in 1314. But in medieval Dublin, and especially on the East Coast, so we're talking about Wexford upwards, you have a shift in mill technology with the arrival of Anglo-Normans. There is changes in techniques, and there's larger millstones, there's larger mills, there's larger mill races, and also there's the introduction of wind power, even though we're not talking about wind power today. So there's historical references to mills in Kilmainham, Chapel Lizard, St. Mary's Abbey, that's the Abbey Street Mill, which I'll talk about now in a second, St. Thomas's Abbey, there's Ship Street, there's the Pole Mills, and on Patrick Street. So we know we have a significant amount of mills, but not all of them have been found, but there are historical references. So a big part, obviously, in the change in medieval Ireland and medieval Dublin is the introduction of major ecclesiastical institutions like the Cistercians and like the Augustinians in Dublin. And of course, they would bring with them that technology, that new milling technology over with them. Now, I'm very happy to talk about this mill today, and a huge thank you to Ian Russell from SASU for giving me some images to talk about, because this mill building is fresh out of the ground. This was dug by Ian in 2019, late 2019. So it has not been published yet, and the report is not out yet. So thank you to Ian for that. And as you can see from this photo here, this mill was dug under extremely trying circumstances with a contiguous piling wall all around it. The mill was at some depth, so it was very difficult to get rid of spoil from the site. So an extremely important site. Cathy Moore was digging a site next to it at the same time. There was revetments, medieval revetments leading up to the site, part of which Claire Walsh had also got back in around 2000 I'm going to say. So we had dated, Claire had dated those revetments to the 13th century. So we think this mill is 13th century. Now, as I put there in the top right, there is a reference to a mill in St. Mary's Abbey, which still is, well, the chapter house is just off Cable Street there. So this was quite close in between Abbey Street and Strand Street, quite close to the Liffey. So what we have here is a mill structure, and I'll go into a bit more detail in a second about that, with a huge timber assembly, the biggest seen in the country, with huge, very impressive oak base plates with mortise joints to hold the mill building in the center there. Kathy Moore was the timber consultant, and she says it's the biggest assemblage that she's seen. These timber base plates are currently very happily housed in the ACSU offices in Tanks. So I'm sure everyone is keen to know that. This tells us a little bit more. It took a while to figure out exactly what was going on here with this mill. So there was no sign of masonry within the mill building itself. You can see the head race there in green, which had some kind of stone lining on the bottom. There was a wheel pit that was discerned, and then a mill building. So we have the whole package here, and then, okay, the red part there, the tail race, is pointing back, obviously back down towards the Liffey. So there may have been a mill race further to the north. So a striking building that was quite larger than most of the early medieval mills that we're finding. One of the main timbers found is in the bottom left, and these are purlins, which, to my knowledge, have not been found before in Ireland. So these were used to house framing for the ceiling for the roof of the mill. So these had been reused then from an earlier building. So these potentially date to the 12th century. So this is a very, very exciting site, and hopefully we'll get to know more about this, and maybe I can grab Ian someday to do a lecture, which would be really great. Now, another mill excavation was carried out by Claire Walsh back in, I'm going to say, in the mid-90s. Well, she definitely published in 97, so early to mid-90s. And this was on Patrick Street. Perhaps we have people here today who were on this site. Raise your hand if you were there. So again, we have this similar theme of base plates, but in this example, then we have a masonry mill. So it's again another very important site. You can see in this. Can you see my cursor move? Just so if I ask, no, yes or no? Well, here in this small one. Okay, in this small. Okay, great. Picture here, we can say the base of St. Patrick's Cathedral and the mill race going towards it. And here is the mill building here. So we have the head race, the wheel pit, the mill building, and the tail race here. And again, it's another reconstruction by Colin Rinn, who is the master of knowledge when it comes to everything mill, especially early medieval and medieval mills. We can see a sluice gate, a wooden undershot mill wheel going in through an axle. Then if you're gearing your wooden gearing up to moving the runner stone here. And this is what's called a hopper. And that would have held the grain before it held. So you'd have a constant stream of grain, an even stream of grain into the upper perforation or eye of the millstone. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the evidence that we have of early medieval and medieval mills. So medieval mills, we know there was mills, there is cartographic sources. 17th century, you have Speed that shows the pole mills, and they were in use from the 13th, 14th century on Ship Street. Testing by Georgina Scally has shown that we have a water wheel and a mill that's still in situ there. This map also shows St. John's malt mill near Corn Market, survey maps, and the civil survey the maps depict small one-story mills with water wheels. They're very well depicted, so you can distinctly see water wheels. And at this stage, all mills, apart from maybe a few in an ecclesiastical context, would have been using all wooden gearing. So they wouldn't have been able to be much bigger than one story. This is the Barony of Newcastle map from the Down survey, and you can see the pole mills again, and also the double mills of St. Thomas's Abbey. So my point here is that you have mill sites reused from the medieval period way into the post-medieval period. And I'll talk about why in a sec. Here is that double mill site dug by Claire Walsh. Again, a site that I was fortunate enough to be on. And as I said, you have that continuity of usage and of site through hundreds of years. I showed this map earlier already today, and here is the wheel pit of the mill that was in use, as you can see here, until the 19th century. So it says flour and oil mill here, and I won't go into the oil part today because it's a bit too much for timelines. So this is Girdler's map, later the Down survey map of Kilmainham and Island Bridge. You can see two mills at Island Bridge, small mills, and then again at Kilmainham. So we have references to 12th century references to mills at Island Bridge. And then we have this picture with Frank Miles for, I don't know if Frank is here today, but this is a fantastic picture on many levels. Island Bridge after the flood by Bernard from 1788. And we see a mill that has been somehow taken apart, and also nearer to us, they're building a new bridge, Sarah Bridge, that we would cross now today. So we have a mill in this location, and we have references in the Dublin newsletter from 1738 for a bolting mill for sale with Burr millstones. So this is very important because it's a bolting mill, and that infers that you've got metal gearing for a start, which in metal gearing enables more than one millstone to be used at one time. And the bolting mill also needs a third story for grain storage and to house machinery to clean the grain prior to the grinding process. So you have that change from a small one-story mill that would possibly have one, at most two millstones, to bolting mills, which are at least 3 stories in height and are becoming close to the mills that we would be familiar with today. So we have the continued use of medieval mills and building sites. Why? Well, you've already got the mill infrastructure in place. In Island Bridge here, you can see from the OS first edition, this mill race is quite long, and this is not even the longest mill race that you'll get in Dublin. But the amount of labour needed to dig the infrastructure for a mill is quite intensive. So if you have a mill race or other infrastructure in place, why not reuse? Of course, most people would be familiar with this weir, which is in position of the medieval weir also. And this is the weir that's on the map here. Also, mills would have been located from their inception in the place where the flow of the water was strongest, or more useful for the mill and for cereal production and for millstone movement and for that kinetic energy to be transferred. So where the water flow is strongest and where the gradient is sufficient. Now, I have one exception, so you never really know. There are rules in mills in the infrastructure and what you will find, but there are also anomalies, such as this mill dug by Frank Miles, and I was fortunate enough to be on this site too. And this was back maybe around 5 years ago. And we dug what we called, and we have proof that it is an Aruba water mill in the 17th century. Now, this was in the tidal zone on Sir John Rogerson's Quay. And this was a T-shaped building. And then at one end of it, it had a penstock tower Now we were scratching our head for a while what this building was. It's got a hole between, which the hole is here, between the tower and this T-shaped building. And after research, and I should add, I did talk to Colin Wren about this, and he agreed that this is what's known as an Aruba watermill, mainly used over in the Middle East. And this is where the tower is filled up with water and then gradually released. So it's basically like a mill pond, but in tower form to push a horizontal. So this is the only of a possible horizontal wheel mill that we have in the city. And I said this was in the tidal zone, so that's very important. So the tower was obviously being filled up every day, and the water stored then to provide that power to turn the horizontal mill wheel. So there was no evidence of the millstones, unfortunately, within the building, but a very interesting site. So you never know what you're going to find in what context. Post-medieval mills, we have exponential growth in the city. We have the movement of the city east. We have the construction of Sir John Rogerson's Quay and Grand Canal docks. And we have an explosion in the size of the population from 10,000 in 1600 to 382,000 in 1901. So we have a rise in the amount of flour being produced, obviously to feed the population. There was huge advances in milling technology, and there was this shift from a localized industry, which was largely a localized industry till around 1800, to one that was international. We have a shift from this mill on the down survey to this mill and this mill over here. There's the Dublin Port Mill, the famous Odlums Mill, which is still there. This is now being curated by Lar Joy, and this is a recent picture that I took the other day when I was down in, which is inside my 5K, I should say, down at Grand Canal docks with my little boy. And this is Boland's Mill. And just to give you an example, Boland's Mill in the 1870s had 63 pairs of millstones. Okay, so this cast iron gearing makes a huge change where we can run far more millstones and far more bolting gear that is involved in the preparation of the grain. Some context in this huge change, societal change. Britain at the time, you have the Atlantic economy, and also how you have the Napoleonic War. So Britain needs more flour. So there's a government bounty on all flour sent to Dublin in the second half of the 18th century, which you would think would result in less flour being produced in Dublin, but no, because so much was being exported. By turn of the 19th century, the Statistical Survey of County Dublin shows in the city of Dublin we have 16 corn mills and 7. By this stage, another technological advances that we have the introduction of the steam engine. Not quite so romantic as the lolling, water wheel going around, but hey, it was far. I'm not going to say cheaper, but it was far more productive in terms of the energy that it produced to turn millstones. And it also enabled mills like Boland's Mill to come into being. What they did is they imported coal to power their steam engines, and then after that they exported their flour. So mid-19th century Ordnance Survey mapping, and also Griffith's valuation. Here's the flour mills in red and the corn mills in blue. You see we have quite a number, but by the 25-inch, we have a less number, and they've moved eastwards along with the city. And the advent or the introduction of the steam engine very much enabled that, and also the examples on the docks where milling was being done at a very much industrial scale. So what in terms of archaeological protection do we have for milling sites? Well, sites are protected under the RMP. All of you will be familiar with the RMP zone for the historic city. So in planning in Dublin City Council, we can put a condition on something that is anything that is within that zone where we feel there's an archaeological component. So we have mills here in Kilmainham that is owned by Dublin City Council, and here's another one on the Camac that's gone now. But these mill, and also here's one on Watling Street in Usher's Quay, which I think Archaeology Plan are currently working on. But these mills are on the RMP because there is earlier mills beneath the later building, not for the building that's there at the moment. Some of these mills, the extant millings like Kilmainham Mill and like Boland's Mill, would be on the record of protected structures, but these are on the RPS because of the earlier mill sites. So obviously all of us here today would be hopeful that the new Monuments Bill will adjust this, where later buildings as well of importance are included in protection, statutory protection. Just to mention the Industrial Heritage CIHR. This is a multi-phase industrial heritage project carried out by DCC, and it includes a lot of mills. For the people who haven't heard of it, this is a project where all the industrial, or most of the industrial infrastructure of the city was listed, and this is often taken from historical maps, or if a description could be given, it was given. But there was 39 flour and corn mills listed and 8 windmills. And just to let everybody know that that's online now. So if people want to look at that, it's on the Dublin County Heritage page on the Heritage Map Viewer website. So very interesting. Now, anybody digging a mill or looking at mills in Dublin, these are the books you need to get. You may have heard of William E. Hogg. People were talking about the Mills and Millers of Ireland just a few minutes ago. Well, I think William E. Hogg was the founding member and is the lifelong president, as far as I know. But he did every archaeologist a huge favor in that he looked at all the first edition maps and he listed the mills on them for the whole country. And he also looked at Griffith's valuation, the valuation books, and he listed the mills on them for the whole country. That's an amazing thing to do. So that's very important. There's also been work done on the mills on the rivers Dodder and the Poddle by Don McEntee and Michael Corcoran, very important book. You have to start with Colin Rhinn's work, Industrial Ireland. Colin would be the expert in mills in the country and very much a mentor for me. There's a great book called The Industrial Archaeology of Northern Ireland by McCutcheon, 1981. It gives some great examples of mills and also the science, since very much is a science in terms of the movement of a mill wheel and that transference. They know exactly if you build a mill wheel of this size, how much pressure is needed, how much energy is needed, and how fast the millstone will go if you build a mill wheel of a certain size, etc., etc. So there's a lot of good information. For early medieval millstones and mills, look at Harnessing the Tides, which is by Thomas McAleen, and that talks about Nendrum Mill. The only early medieval mill I think that has got a complete millstone set found within the mill. So that's about that excavation. And there's Claire Walsh's book on her Dublin Patrick Street medieval excavations as well. So I suppose I have to stop it there because I've already gone out of time. That's just a whistle-stop tour of skimming the stone across the water of milling in Dublin. So I think I've said enough, and any important hard questions, I will answer them by email.